the wolf and the pigs together at the trough. A story that shocked the entire village. What could make a wild predator, a symbol of primitive freedom, forget the laws of nature and bow down to its greatest enemies? This story did not begin with a roar, but with a deafening crash. A crash that shook the village of Sosnovka from early morning until late at night. The forest that had stood here for centuries was falling under the merciless onslaught of steel. Chainsaws dug into the living trunks of pine and birch trees, and the centuries-old giants fell to the ground with a death rattle, leaving behind gaping wounds and the smell of sawdust mixed with acrid diesel fumes. For people, it was just business. For the inhabitants of the forest, it was the end of the world. In a shallow burrow, on the very edge of this hell, she lay. A she-wolf. Her sides were sunken, each vertebra visible through her dull fur. Next to her, blindly poking their snouts into her belly, 3 cubs whimpered. They had been born just a few weeks ago, in a world that was still whole. Now their world was destroyed. Their mother's milk was almost gone, bitter from hunger and fear. Every day she went out to hunt. But there was no more hunting. Hares, deer, even mice, every living thing fled from the roar of machines and the clatter of tracks. She returned to the den with empty paws and was met by 3 pairs of hungry, desperately squeaking mouths. An instinct as old as the world itself drove her forward. The instinct of a mother. It was stronger than fear, stronger than centuries of enmity. It led her to the edge of the village. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We are interested in knowing where our videos are being watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. This motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's get started. Led by the scent that drove her empty insides crazy, she lay for hours in the nettles. The smell came from the farthest yard. An old crooked house, a quiet, overgrown garden, and a pigsty. It smelled of slop, warm feed, life, a smell that promised salvation. But there were people there. There was a man, old, gray-haired, slow-moving, but still a man. The she-wolf saw him come out in the evenings and pour steaming food into a long wooden trough. The pigs grunted happily and rushed to the feast. And she lay there, swallowing her hungry saliva, her body trembling from an internal struggle. Fear fought with hunger. An ancient terror of humans fought with the cries of her dying children. For several nights, she returned empty-handed. The wolf cub's cries grew weaker. She knew that another day would pass, and she would begin to lose them, one by one. That night, the decision was made. When the moon hung over the ravaged forest and the last lights in the village went out, she rose. She glided silently through the vegetable garden under the old fence. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. The pigs in the pen sensed her. They huddled in the far corner, grunting anxiously and hollowly. They smelled of fear. But the she-wolf did not look at them. She had only one goal, the wooden trough. There were still remnants of the evening meal in it. She lowered her head and began to eat. Quickly, greedily, choking. She couldn't taste anything, just filling the emptiness that had tormented her for weeks. Having satisfied her first, most terrible hunger, she froze. She listened. The house was quiet. The dog on the chain didn't even bark. He was too old and deaf. The she-wolf raised her head, looked at the pigs huddled together, and without making a sound, disappeared just as silently into the darkness of the night. She didn't know she was being watched. 2 eyes were watching her from the dark window of the barn. Pyotr Maximovich Zakharov was awake. He had been noticing strange things for several days. In the mornings, The trough was licked clean, which his lazy pigs never did. They were restless. That night, he decided not to go to bed, took an old sheepskin coat, and sat down in the barn, overlooking the pen. What he saw should have made him grab the double-barreled shotgun standing in the doorway. But Pyotr did not move. He had lived on this land for 72 years. He had seen the forest alive and had seen it being killed. He knew the habits of every animal. And now he did not see a brazen predator. He saw a skeleton covered in skin. He saw despair in every movement, in the way the head was bowed submissively, in the way the ears twitched fearfully at every rustle. He did not see a killer. He saw a mother. Peter quietly returned to the house, closed the door behind him, and sat at the table for a long time, staring into the darkness. He didn't know what to do, but he knew exactly what he wouldn't do. His rifle would remain hanging on the wall. The next morning, the hustle and bustle of the city arrived in Sosnovka in the form of his granddaughter, Anya, a 10-year-old girl with curious eyes and an inexhaustible supply of questions. She jumped out of the stuffy car and immediately plunged into the world of village smells: cut grass, fresh milk, and her grandfather's pies. For her, it was a summer adventure. She did not yet know that she would become the heroine of the most incredible story ever heard in these parts. Her adventures began with strange occurrences. Her grandfather became pensive. In the evenings, he brought the pigs noticeably more food than usual and stood for a long time by the barn, peering into the edge of the forest. One night, Anya woke up thirsty. Passing by her grandfather's room, she saw that the bed was empty. A faint creak came from the yard. Curiosity overcame her sleepiness. She tiptoed to the kitchen window and froze at what she saw. In the moonlight, she made out a silhouette. Large, gray, with a sharp snout and erect ears. A wolf. A real wolf. It stood at the pig trough and ate. And her grandfather? Her grandfather stood on the porch, only 20 steps away, and just watched. He didn't shout or wave his arms. He just stood there like an old tree and watched. Anya felt no fear, only endless, childlike wonder and pity. The wolf was so thin. She could see its bones rolling under its skin. The next day, she didn't ask her grandfather a single question. She kept their secret. In the evening, when Peter went to feed the pigs, she quietly slipped 2 large boiled potatoes and a piece of bread left over from lunch into the bucket of slop. It was her little secret within her grandfather's big secret. She didn't know that her actions would set off a chain of events that would turn the whole village upside down. The problems began at the other end of the village, at Ivan Kluev's house. Ivan was a farmer of a different ilk than Pyotr. His yard was clean, his tractor was under a shed, and his chicken coop was covered with new netting. Ivan did not like disorder, and he hated predators. One morning, he noticed that 3 chickens were missing. After searching the perimeter, he found what he was looking for. Right by the fence, in the soft ground, there was a clear footprint. A wide paw, 4 toes, claws. A wolf's footprint. There was no doubt about it. Ivan was overcome with rage. The insolent beast had dared to come right to his house. He grabbed the phone and started calling the men. "There's a wolf in the village," he growled into the receiver. "They've lost all fear. Today it's chickens, tomorrow what? Will it start attacking the children?" Ivan's words fell on fertile ground. Fear of wolves was in the blood of the villagers, passed down from generation to generation. Stories about gray bandits slaughtering entire herds of livestock were part of local folklore. Ivan quickly gathered a coalition of pragmatic and determined farmers like himself. They decided that there was no place for the beast in the village. a hunt had to be organized. Rumors spread through the village faster than ripples on water. Soon the news reached Peter. A neighbor who had stopped by for salt casually remarked, "Maximik, have you heard? Ivan's wolf killed his chickens. The men are getting ready to go hunting. They say the beast is bold and prowling around the village." Peter just grunted and said nothing, but his heart sank with anxiety. He looked toward the forest, where the den with the wolf cubs was hidden behind the wall of trees. Meanwhile, Anya continued her secret mission. Every night she added something to the pig trough. She saw how the she-wolf was gradually changing. Her sides became a little rounder, her fur stopped hanging in shreds. Sometimes, after eating, she would raise her head and look toward the house. Anya felt that the she-wolf was looking directly at her window. And there was no threat in that gaze, only some kind of dull, animal gratitude. The girl felt like a heroine in a fairy tale who had befriended a forest spirit. She did not understand that her fairy tale was rapidly moving towards a very scary ending. The hunters, led by Ivan, began to comb the forest. They found tracks, and all the tracks, strangely enough, led in one direction, to an old, abandoned clearing, beyond which lay the yard of Peter Zakharov. Ivan frowned. He couldn't understand the beast's logic. Why hang around in one place, right next to the village? It was unusual. Wrong. "He's here somewhere, lying low," Ivan said confidently to his men. "He's feeding the bastard. Tonight we'll get him." Right at the scene of the crime. They decided to set up an ambush. Under cover of darkness, 3 men armed with rifles took up positions in the bushes opposite Peter's yard. Ivan, his neighbor, and another young farmer. They waited. An hour, then another. The village fell asleep. And then they saw it. A gray shadow slipped out of the forest. Lightly, almost without touching the ground, it made its way to the pigsty. Ivan raised his rifle and caught the gray silhouette in his sights. His finger was already on the trigger. But in the next moment, he froze, not believing his eyes. The wolf did not attack the pigs. It approached the trough and began to eat. And the pigs, they didn't even squeal. They just moved away a little, continuing to munch sleepily. Ivan had never seen anything like this in his life. It was unnatural, wrong. It shattered all his preconceptions about the world. "What the hell is going on?" whispered his neighbor. But Ivan didn't answer. His brain was working feverishly. And then it dawned on him. Old Peter. He was behind this. He had fed the predator. The senile old man was putting the whole village in mortal danger. Anger swept over him with renewed force. He raised his rifle again, and at that very moment, a small figure appeared on the porch. It was Anya. She was carrying a bowl in her hands. Ivan's finger froze on the trigger. His brain refused to process what he was seeing. A little girl. His own daughter was almost the same age. She was walking straight toward a wild beast with a bowl in her hands. It was madness. Absolute, pure insanity. At that moment, another figure emerged from the shadows of the barn. Old Peter. He didn't shout or run. He just stepped out and stood between his granddaughter and the 3 guns pointed at his yard. "Put the gun down, Ivan." Peter's voice was quiet, but in the silence of the night, it sounded like a thunderclap. Blood rushed to Ivan's face. Rage mixed with confusion exploded inside him. "What are you doing, old man?" he hissed, keeping the barrel pointed. "Have you lost your mind? You're feeding a murderer. He'll be attacking people in your yard soon." Hearing the loud voice and sensing a new threat, the she-wolf pressed herself to the ground. She forgot about her food. All her instincts screamed danger. She slowly began to back away toward the safety of the forest. Anya, seeing the armed men and hearing the shouting, was frightened. The bowl fell from her hands and rolled across the ground with a clatter. But her fear for the wolf was stronger. "Don't touch her," she cried softly, hiding behind her grandfather's back. "She's not evil. She's just hungry." This child's cry stunned the two other hunters. They looked at each other in confusion and lowered their guns slightly. The situation was no longer simple and clear. This was no longer a hunt for a predator. It was something else. "Hungry?" Ivan roared, taking a step forward. "Weren't my chickens hungry? Tomorrow it will kill your goat, Maximik, and the day after tomorrow your granddaughter. A wolf is a wolf." Pyotr looked at Ivan with a long, heavy gaze. Then he slowly raised his gnarled hand and pointed to the dark silhouette of the ravaged forest on the horizon. "Look there first, Ivan. Look what you've done. We came to her house with axes. We took her food. We left her no choice. And now you've come with a gun to punish her for trying to survive." Taking advantage of the confusion, the she-wolf darted to the side. Like a silent gray lightning bolt, she crossed the garden and disappeared into the bushes. The hunt was over, but the real war was just beginning. Ivan stood, breathing heavily. He was ashamed. His simple and understandable rage had encountered something he did not expect: an old man and a child defending a monster. He spat angrily on the ground. "You'll regret this, old man. The whole village will regret it." He turned, and without another word, strode away. His two companions shifted awkwardly, glanced guiltily at Peter and Anya, and hurried after their leader. News of the nighttime incident at the Zakharovs' house spread like wildfire through Sosnovka. It was passed from mouth to mouth at the well, in the only village store, and over fences. With each retelling, it grew with new, incredible details. People said that old Peter had completely lost his mind, keeping a wolf on a chain instead of a dog. That his city granddaughter rode it through the forest. That the wolf ate with them at the same table. The village was divided. The elderly, who remembered the old days, shook their heads and supported Peter. The forest feeds him, and he repays it with kindness. But when they started cutting him, the beast turned on the people. The young and pragmatic, like Ivan, tapped their fingers on their temples. They saw this as a threat, a violation of every rule imaginable. Wolves belonged in the forest, and people belonged in their homes. And between them, there should be a wall of fear and a gun. Peter and Anya found themselves in the center of this storm. Some neighbors stopped greeting them. Children teased Anya, calling her the wolf's bride. But the girl stood firm. She and her grandfather now shared a very important secret. And this secret made them stronger. The she-wolf did not come the next night, nor the night after that. Anya's heart ached with anxiety. Had she been so frightened that she would never return? What about her cubs? Were they starving again? Every evening, she placed a bowl of food at the edge of the garden, but it remained untouched. Pyotr reassured her as best he could. "She's a wild animal. She's smart. She's being cautious. If she gets hungry, she'll come back." He was worried too, although he didn't show it. He knew that Ivan wouldn't give up so easily. He was harboring resentment, and that resentment was looking for an outlet. Ivan really wasn't sitting idly by. He felt that his authority had been shaken. He needed to prove that he was right. He needed the wolf to become a real monster in the eyes of the whole village. And fate, it seemed, was conspiring in his favor. A few days later, on a distant pasture belonging to a neighboring farm, a shepherd found a calf that had been torn to pieces. It was still very young and had strayed from its mother. There were many tracks around it. Were they from dogs? Wolves? Who could tell now? But for Ivan, it was clear. He took a photo of the torn carcass on his phone. He gathered a few men and led them to the spot. "Look," he shouted, pointing at the bloody mess. "This is what your Zakharov is feeding them? This is how he repays you. Today it's a calf. Tomorrow who? Who's next?" The argument was compelling. Photos of the dead calf spread throughout the village. The doubts of those who had been hesitant were swept away by a wave of fear and anger. Now it was no longer Ivan who was the aggressor. Now he was the defender. And old Peter and his granddaughter had gone from being oddballs to accomplices of a murderer. That evening, a crowd gathered at Peter's house. Not 3 hunters like last time, but 15 men. They were sullen, angry men. Some carried pitchforks, others axes. Ivan stood at the front. He no longer shouted. He spoke quietly and meaningfully, which made his words sound even more frightening. "Maximich, come out. We're asking you nicely. Hand over the beast, or tell us where his lair is. We don't want any trouble. But if you cover for him, trouble will come to your house too." Anya, seeing the crowd from the window, clung to her grandfather's arm. She was trembling. Pyotr stepped out onto the porch alone. He was calm, as always. He looked at the faces of his fellow villagers, faces he had known all his life. And now he saw nothing in them but blind fear. "I don't have any beast," he replied in an even voice. "And I don't know where his lair is." Ivan sneered. "You don't know? Fine. Then we'll look for it ourselves." He turned to the crowd. "Men, he's hiding somewhere here nearby. We need to search everywhere, every bush, every hole. Find the lair and finish this once and for all." The crowd roared in approval and moved toward the forest surrounding Peter's property. They walked in a chain, like on a manhunt, breaking through the undergrowth, looking under every upturned root. Anya watched from the window, tears streaming down her cheeks. She knew what they were looking for. They were looking for her she-wolf's home. They were looking for her little, defenseless cubs. Peter put his heavy hand on her shoulder. "Quiet, Anya. The forest is big. They won't find it that easily." But there was no longer any confidence in his voice. He looked at the trampled beds, at the broken branches in his garden, at the people with weapons combing through the forest that had become his home, and he understood that the malice that had settled in their hearts could be more terrifying than the hunger of any predator. Suddenly, from the ravine, at the edge of the clearing, there was a loud, triumphant cry. "I found them! Over here! I found them!" Anya's heart stopped. The cry pierced the evening silence. Peter and Anya exchanged glances. There was no fear in that cry. It was filled with malicious triumph. Without hesitation, Peter jumped off the porch and rushed toward the ravine. He didn't run as fast as he had in his youth. His breath was uneven, branches whipped his face. But he ran. Anya followed close behind. The tears had dried on her cheeks, leaving salty trails. Now she was driven not by fear, but by a fierce, desperate determination. They jumped out onto a small clearing at the foot of an uprooted pine tree. The whole crowd was already there. They stood in a semicircle, looking at the roots of the fallen tree. There, in a shallow hole dug in the sand, huddled together in a pitiful heap, 3 tiny wolf cubs were whimpering. They were still completely blind, helpless, looking more like yard dogs than future fearsome predators. The man who had found the den stood proudly nearby, his hands on his hips. Ivan pushed his way forward. A victorious smile played on his face. He turned to Peter, who had caught up with him. "Well, Maximich, are you going to say you don't know? They're sitting right under your nose. I told you," he said to the whole crowd. "He fed her. She gave birth here. She raised a pack of wolves right under our noses. Anya gasped when she saw the wolf cubs. They were so small, so defenseless. She rushed forward, but Peter managed to grab her by the arm and pull her back. "Stop! Think about it. They're children. They're blind puppies. Puppies that will be slaughtering our livestock in 6 months," Ivan snapped. "And in a year, they might even attack our children. Evil must be nipped in the bud." A murmur of approval rose from the crowd. Fear, fueled by Ivan's words, outweighed any pity. "Think about what you're doing." Peter refused to give up. Killing a baby is a sin. No real hunter would do such a thing. And feeding a predator isn't a sin. Isn't putting the whole village in danger a sin? We're restoring the order that you broke, old man. He turned to one of the men holding a sharp sapper shovel. "Finish them off, before they grow up." The man with the shovel stepped toward the den. He raised it above the squeaking ball of fur. Anya screamed. It was a piercing, desperate cry that deafened the ears. She broke free from her grandfather's grip and rushed toward the pit, trying to cover the cubs with her small body. "Don't touch them. Please, don't touch them." At that very moment, she emerged from behind the wall of trees like a silent shadow. The she-wolf. She did not growl or bare her teeth. She simply appeared at the edge of the clearing, and everyone froze. Time stood still. The men raised their guns as if on command. A dozen barrels were aimed at the gray silhouette. The she-wolf stood motionless, and her yellow eyes reflected all the horror of this world. She saw the crowd of enemies. She saw the weapons. She saw her crying little protector. And she saw the man with the shovel, frozen over her children. "Here comes Mommy." Ivan breathed maliciously. "Excellent. Now we'll finish them all off. Fire!" But no shots were fired, because the she-wolf did something no one could have expected. No one. She took one slow, submissive step forward, then another. She lowered her head to the ground. Her ears were pressed down. Her whole body expressed complete, absolute submission. And then, in front of 15 armed men, she slowly, very slowly, lay down on her side and rolled onto her back, exposing her unprotected belly to their guns. She lay motionless, staring at them. A mother begging for mercy for her children in the only way she knew how. A dead silence hung over the clearing, broken only by the quiet whimpering of the wolf cubs and the sobs of the little girl. The silence was deafening. 15 adult men, armed with rifles and pitchforks, stared at the she-wolf lying before them and did not know what to do. The age-old program ingrained in their genes, kill the predator, had failed. The beast did not attack. It did not defend itself. It begged for mercy. The man with the entrenching shovel was the first to lower his weapon. He looked at Ivan, then at the she-wolf, at the crying Anya covering the cubs, and silently stepped aside. Another followed his example, then another. Their simple faces, roughened by work, expressed confusion. What was happening was beyond comprehension. Ivan looked at his men, at their wavering faces, and realized that he was losing control. Rage boiled up in him again, mixing with humiliation. "What are you standing there for?" he growled. "Have you fallen for her tricks? She's a beast, a cunning, treacherous beast. Shoot!" But no one raised their guns. Everyone looked at Peter. The old man slowly approached Anna and, placing his hand on her shoulder, spoke. He spoke quietly, but in the ringing silence, every word was heard. "Look at her. She didn't come to kill. She came to beg. She is offering her life in exchange for the lives of her children. Can a man who considers himself the king of nature be less merciful than a wild beast? Peter paused, looking around the crowd with a heavy gaze. You pity the calf. You pity the chickens. But don't you pity the forest? The one you burn, cut down, and turn into a desert? She didn't come to us because she had a good life. She came because we left her no other choice. Are we its judges, or are we its debtors? These words, simple and powerful, hit their mark. The men began to look at each other, averting their eyes. One by one, they silently lowered their guns. Their anger, based on fear, faded, giving way to something new. Shame. Ivan saw that he had lost. The crowd was no longer on his side. He was left alone with his hatred. Cowards, he spat. You'll regret this when that creature starts watching your children outside their homes. He turned abruptly and, breaking branches, strode away, back to the village. The crowd stood silently for a few more moments, then began to disperse. People left quietly, not looking at each other, trying to leave as quickly as possible the place where their confidence in their own righteousness had been shattered. Soon only 4 remained in the clearing: Peter, Anya, and the she-wolf with her cubs. The she-wolf was still lying on her back, not daring to move. Only her eyes followed every movement. Anya, sobbing, stroked the small warm lumps in the pit. Peter slowly approached and crouched down next to his granddaughter. It's all right, Anya, he said quietly. It's over. He looked at the she-wolf. Do you hear? Everything is fine. You can get up. No one will hurt you anymore. As if understanding his words, the she-wolf slowly and very carefully turned over and stood up on her paws. She did not take a step toward the people. She approached the den, nudged each of her whimpering cubs with her nose, and licked them. Satisfied that they were all right, she raised her head and looked at the old man and the girl. It was a long, attentive look. There was no longer any fear or submission in it. There was something else, a deep, ancient understanding that could not be put into words. Then she turned and, as silently as she had appeared, disappeared into the thicket. Will she come back for them? Anya whispered. She'll definitely come back, Peter replied confidently. But not today. There's too much of our scent here today. We need to leave. He helped his granddaughter to her feet. Let's go, Anya. Let's give her some time. They walked home, leaving behind the little life they had just managed to save. An awkward silence reigned in the village. The events in the clearing were the main topic of conversation, but people discussed them in whispers. People avoided eye contact. Ivan locked himself in his house and didn't talk to anyone. Something had broken in the usual order of things in Sosnovka. The line between us and them, between right and wrong, had become blurred. Without meaning to, Peter made them think about things they preferred not to think about. That night, neither Peter nor Anya slept. They sat in the kitchen drinking herbal tea. Each was lost in their own thoughts. Peter thought about the fragility of the world and how easily human stupidity could destroy it. Anya thought about the little blind wolf cubs and their brave mother. At dawn, Peter went out onto the porch. He approached the place where the den had been. The hole was empty. The damp earth was marked with the prints of a large wolf's paw and many small, random scratches. She had come during the night. She had taken her children to a safer place, far away from people. Anya ran out after her and saw the empty hole, and disappointment was reflected on her face. They're gone, Grandpa? They're gone. Peter nodded. And that's good, Anya. It means they'll live. Summer was coming to an end. The story of the she-wolf gradually became a local legend. The logging stopped. Either the plan had been fulfilled or some inspectors from the district had intervened, concerned about complaints about noise and the destruction of the forest belt. The forest became quiet again. Little by little, the game began to return. Life returned to normal. Ivan still avoided Peter, but his aggression subsided, replaced by sullen withdrawal. He no longer invited anyone to go hunting. Something had broken inside him that night in the clearing. Anya went to the edge of the forest every day, hoping to see her wolf once more. But she never showed up. The forest kept its secrets. It was time for Anya to go back to the city. Saying goodbye to her grandfather was sad. "Will you come back next summer?" Peter asked, hugging his granddaughter. "Of course, Grandpa," she replied, sniffing. Of course, on her last evening in the village, Anya went, as usual, to the place she shared with the she-wolf, to the large rock at the edge of the forest. She no longer hoped for anything. She just wanted to say goodbye to the forest. She sat down on the rock and watched the sun set behind the tops of the pine trees. And suddenly, she saw her. The she-wolf emerged from behind the trees. She was no longer the thin, emaciated creature she had been a few months ago. Her fur glistened in the rays of the setting sun. Her body had become strong and supple. She was the true mistress of this forest. And next to her, clumsily shifting their paws and playfully biting each other, ran 3 grown cubs. They were already the size of small dogs, strong and healthy. The she-wolf stopped at the edge of the clearing, at a safe distance. She looked straight at Anya. Then she whimpered softly, calling one of the cubs. He ran up to her, and she gently nudged him forward with her nose. The cub took a few uncertain steps toward the girl, stopped, tilted his head curiously, then whimpered in response and ran back to his brothers. The she-wolf looked at Anya once more. It was a farewell glance, gratitude, recognition, and then the whole family turned and disappeared into the evening forest. Anya sat on the rock, tears streaming down her face. But these were no longer tears of fear or grief. They were tears of quiet, bright happiness. She realized that she had witnessed a real miracle. A miracle that proved that even in the cruelest world, there is room for compassion. And that sometimes, to save someone's life, you just need to lower your gun at the right moment. A year passed. Once again, a hot summer arrived, smelling of pine resin and dusty roads. And once again, Anya came to Sosnovka. But it was a different village, and she herself was different. She had grown up more in that year than in all the previous 10. The roar of chainsaws and logging trucks no longer shook the air. The logging had stopped. Young saplings were already sprouting in the gaping clearings, and the forest was slowly but surely beginning to heal its wounds. The story that had shocked the entire village last summer had become an integral part of it. It turned into a parable that was told around evening campfires. A parable about a hungry wolf, a wise old man, a brave girl, and how easily fear can turn people into monsters more terrifying than any forest predator. Pyotr Maximovich met his granddaughter on the same porch. He seemed completely unchanged, the same calm gaze and kind wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. He had become something of an unofficial elder in the village. People, even those who had shouted the loudest in the clearing, now greeted him with special respect. They did not always understand him, but they felt that he was right. Once, Pyotr told Anna a story. Several months earlier, in early spring, he had run into Ivan in the forest. Ivan was walking along his distant field, checking the fence. Peter greeted him, and to his surprise, Ivan did not turn away, but stopped. They stood in silence, looking at the awakening forest. Then Ivan said quietly, I saw tracks here last week, by the stream. A large she-wolf and 3, almost grown. They passed by, heading toward the distant swamp. They didn't touch anyone. He looked at Peter, and there was no malice in his heavy gaze. Only fatigue and something else, like a belated realization. The forest is alive, Maximic. You were right. He nodded and walked on. And for Peter, that short conversation meant more than all the apologies. It meant that the world had changed for the better, even if only a little. The ice in the heart of the most stubborn man in the village had begun to melt. He too had learned to put down his gun, even if only in his heart. Anya still went to the forest every day. She no longer waited for a meeting. She just came to the place where her fairy tale had come true. She sat on that very rock and listened to the voices of the birds, the rustling of the leaves, and felt the breath of a huge living organism that had accepted her and revealed its most intimate secret to her. She knew that the she-wolf and her grown children were somewhere out there, deep in the forest. They were living their lives, hunting, continuing their ancient lineage. And that knowledge was enough for her. On her last day, before leaving, she came to say goodbye, as always. She wandered along the stream, jumping from rock to rock. Suddenly, her gaze caught something unusual on the muddy bank. It was a piece of dried clay that had broken off the shore. And on it was a clear, perfect imprint. A wide paw, 4 toes, claws, a wolf's footprint. She carefully picked up the shard. It looked as if it had been molded especially for her. It was as if someone had left her a message, a farewell gift, or just a coincidence, a game of nature. It didn't matter anymore. She pressed the clay imprint to her chest. For her, it was proof that it was all real, that her incredible summer was not a dream. In the evening, sitting in the car that was taking her back to the noisy city, Anya looked at the receding silhouette of the forest. She was taking with her more than just memories. She was taking with her the knowledge that compassion is not a weakness, but a great strength. That the world is not divided into black and white, friends and enemies, and that sometimes the most important lessons are taught to us by those who have no human voice, but have a huge heart capable of self-sacrifice for the sake of their children. This story is not about how the wolf came to the people. It is about why he was forced to do so. It is a legend about how one small family, an old man and his granddaughter, reminded an entire village that they are only guests in this vast, ancient world, and that everyone who breathes under this sky has the right to live. The wolf and the pigs at the same trough. A picture that once seemed unthinkable became a symbol for Sosnovka that even centuries-old enmity can give way to a desperate plea for life. Who do you think was truly right in this story? Peter, who defended the beast out of compassion, or Ivan, who tried to protect the village out of pragmatism?